Gotcha. Yes, we're back. Hi. We're back with another installment of Storytime with Chris. As I always say, you don't have to read these or listen to these stories when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max relaxing, chillaxing time, in between time, mean time, scheme time, study time, break time, CP time. Anytime that you want to hear a highly animated voice bringing you wonderful stories of magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. We are now entering the final part of Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising sequence, Silver on the Tree. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Now, finally, Will and Bran have successfully gotten through the Lost Land. They have earned the last thing of power, which is the Crystal Sword of Light, made by the King of the Lost Land. But because the sword was taken, one of the final things of power, now the Lost Land no longer exists, and it is gone from this world. Now we're going to see what happens when they return to their proper time. Chapter 16. That's better. Part 4. The Midsummer Tree. Chapter 16. Sunrise. Jane had got out before 5 from the sleeping hotel. She did not wake her brothers. Irrationally but strongly she felt that when Merriman had said, "Be on the beach at sunrise," he had meant the words particularly for her. The boys, she thought, could follow in their own time. So she slipped out alone into the gray morning and crossed the silent road and railway track, hearing only the surf and a distant thunder on the beach beyond. A dozen startled rabbits bounded away from her as she crossed the railway, their white scuds bobbing. Now and then a sheep's deep cowl floated down from the mountain. The morning was colorless and cold. Jane shivered in spite of her sweater and ran over the rolling golf course towards the high dunes. Then she was climbing through long, wiry marram grass, with the dew-darkened sand sifting cold through her sandals, until the last step brought her breathless to the top of the tallest dune, and the world opened before her in a great sweep of brown sand and gray sea. Its flat horizon dissolving into mist, where the arms of Cardigan Bay embraced the sea and the sky. Something lay at her feet on the crest of the dune. Looking down, Jane found a small brown rabbit. Its eyes were open and unblinking. It was dead. When she stepped over it, she saw with a shock that its stomach had been torn open and the guts ripped out before the rest of the untouched furry body had been tossed casually aside. Jane went on down the dune in long, sliding steps, more slowly, wondering for the first time what she would expect to see when the sun rose. She crossed the dry sand above high water mark, scarred with the footprints of yesterday's holiday. Feeling suddenly vulnerable, she went on, out to the vast, exposed sweep of sand that fills the Duvy estuary at low water and stretches for 10 miles and more up the coast on either side. Nothing was before her but the gray sea and sky and the long, soft, roaring line of the surf. Through the sandals, her feet could feel the hard, rippled pattern left on the sand by the waves. Flocks of roosting gulls rose lazily as she reached the smooth, wet sand nearer the sea. Dunlins swooped, piping. Round any tide-left heap of seaweed, thousands of sandhoppers busily leapt, a strange, flurry mist of movement on all the stillness. The record of other flurrying was written already on the hard sand, gouges and claw marks and empty broken shells, where hungry herring seagulls at dawn had seized any mollusk, a fraction too slow at burrowing out of reach. Here and there an enormous jellyfish lay stranded, with great slashes torn out of the translucent flesh by the seagulls' greedy beaks. Out over the sea the birds coast peaceful, quiet. Jane shivered again. She veered to the left and walked towards the great jutting corner of sand where the river Duve met the sea. A thin sheet of water spread rapidly towards her feet. The tide was coming in, advancing more than a foot every minute over these long, flat sands. On the corner of the estuary, as the shellfish under the... Oh, on the corner of the estuary, Jane paused. Sorry, skipped a line. I was moving a little too fast. Jane paused, isolated far out on the enormous beach, feeling small as a shellfish under the empty sky. She looked inland to the village of Aberdyfi, lying on the river, with the mountains rising on either side, and she saw that the sky over the huddle of gray slate roofs was pink and blue, mounded with reddish clouds, and then behind Aberdyfi, the sun came up. Duvi, because the Y is a V sound. Dufi, Aberdyfi. The sun came up. In a brilliant yellow-white glare, the fierce globe rose out of the land, and Jane swung round again, back towards the sea. All the grayness had gone. Suddenly now the sea was blue. The curling wave-tops shone a brilliant white. Seagulls gleamed white in the air, and in a long roosting line on the golden sandbar in the mouth of the river, where they had not ever been visible before, her shadow lay long and thin before her on the sand, reaching out to sea. Each shell had its own dark, clear shadow now, each strand of weed, even the ripples of the sand. Only the mountains across the estuary were dark and obscure, vanishing into cloud. At their feet, a long white arm of mist shrouded the river. Overhead, in the blue sky, high bars of cloud were moving fast inland, row after row, but the wind that she could feel rising down here, cold on her face, was blowing from the land out to the sea in the form of clouds. Now in the sunlight, Jane saw clearly the small hieroglyphics written by the feet of birds all around her on the sand, the arrowhead footmarks of gulls, the scutter of sandpipers and turnstones. A black-backed gull swooped overhead, and its yelping, yodeling cry faded into the wind. A long laugh ending in a husky croak. A high piping came from the sea's edge. The water ran in, faster, faster, over the flat sand. All at once, Jane too began to run, away from the sea, towards the sun. The clouds flew over her head faster than she, rushing eastward. Yet into her face the rising wind blew stronger and stronger, picking up the sand as it rose, in long streamers and trails. It blew into her eyes in a fine stinging mist. She ran more slowly, staggering against it, leaning into it, seeing only the flying streams of bright sand. Voices called her name. She saw Simon and Barney rushing towards her from the dunes. She thought, "They came sooner than I expected." But something drove her to ignore them, to run on, even as they came up level with her. She flung herself forward, eastward into the wind, with the boys at her side, and then they stumbled as ahead of them 2 figures took shape in the flying sand against the brilliant sun, like apparitions in a golden mist. The bars of cloud overtook the sky, and the blazing light died, all color dropping away, and before them stood Will and Bran, and bright against his white sweater and jeans, Bran carried a gleaming sword. Barney's yell was pure triumphant delight. "You got it!" "Hey," said Simon, beaming. Jane said weakly, "Oh, goodness! Are you all right?" She saw the sword. "Oh, Bran!" The wind whistled softly past them on the beach, chill but more docile now. Blowing gritty streamers of sand against their legs, Bran held out the sword toward them, slantwise, turned the two-edged blade so that even beneath the clouding sky its engraved surface glittered and danced. They saw that a thin cord of gold ran down the center of the crystal blade from the handle, a golden handle behind an ornate crosspiece hilt, inlaid with mother-of-pearl. "Arias," Bran said. "Yes, very beautiful." He was staring at the sword through narrowed eyes. His dark glasses were gone, and without them his face looked oddly naked and very pale. He turned inland slowly, the sword in his hand turning as if it were leading him. "Arias, blazing, sword of the sunrise." "Reaching to the sunrise," Will said. "That's right." Will looked at him quickly, in a kind of grateful relief. "It does. It turns to the east, Will. It pulls like." He pointed the sword high towards the glow in the cloud cover, behind which the newly risen sun shone. "The sword knows why it was made," Will said. He looked deeply tired, Jane thought, drained as though strength had run out of him, whereas Bran seemed full of new life, vibrant as a taut wire. This world brightened and filled with sudden color as the sun shone out for a moment through a gap in the cloud. The sword gleamed. "Sheath it, Bran," Will said quickly. Bran nodded as if the same quick wariness that struck his own mind, and they watched in astonishment as he seemed to mime the rising and thrusting of the sword into an imaginary scabbard on an imaginary sword belt at his side. But as he thrust the sword down, it disappeared. Which shows that the sword belt allows the sword to have a cloak of invisibility around it. It's very cool. Stealth mode. Jane, staring with her mouth open, found Bran looking at her. Ah, Ginny, he said slowly. You can't see it now. She shook her head. So, no other ordinary person will either, I suppose. Excuse me, Simon said. Barney said, what about the dark? Jane saw both Bran and as if in answer, Will said, we can put you in the way of destroying yourself. We can put you in the way of destroying... Oh, just... Hi. I don't know why it keeps connecting and reconnecting y'all, but I'm gonna try to see if I can fix it.
Okay. All right, let's...
Oh, okay. So we got our music back. So I don't know what's going on, y'all. I feel like there's been a bit of a solar flare activity, and hopefully you'll discuss this in school. But like geomagnetic storms are nothing to sneeze at. Let's go on and continue our reading. The clouds were solid over the place where the sun had disappeared, the light as cold and gray now as when Jane had first come down to the beach. Sand whirled up in strange clouds from the dunes, flurrying, swirling, and suddenly there was a sound out of the golden brown mist of a cloud, a muffled thudding like the sound of a heart beating, but diffused all round them so they could not tell where it began. Jane saw Will's head go up stiff and alert, and Bran too turned in search like a questing dog. Suddenly, the two of them were standing back to back, covering each direction, watchful and protective. The thudding grew louder, closer, and Bran suddenly swept his arm up, holding the sword Eneas, bright with a light of its own. But in the same moment, the muffled sound was a thunder all around them, close, close, and out of the whirling sand came a white-robed figure galloping on a tall white horse. The white rider sent his horse on one thundering pass beside them, the white hood hiding his face, white robe swirling, and at the last instant, as they flinched away, he leaned swiftly sideways from the saddle, sent Simon sprawling on the sand with one swinging blow, snatched Barney up into his grip, and disappeared. The wind blew, the sand scurried and leapt, and there was no longer anyone there. "Barney!" Jane's voice cracked. "Barney! Will, where is he?" Will's face was twisted with concern and an intent listening. He looked at her once blindly, as if not sure who she was. Waving back over the dunes, he said hoarsely, "Go back! We will find him!" Then he was standing with Bran, each of them with one hand on the hilt of the crystal sword. Bran glancing sideways at him as if waiting for instruction, and Will said, "Turn." And without letting go of the sword, they disappeared in the blink of an eye as if they had never been there. All that Jane and Simon had was the dark ghost that is left inside the eye by a vanished bright light. For in the last moment they had seen blue-white flame blaze up and down the length of the sword. "They'll bring him back," Simon said huskily. "Oh, Simon, what can we do?" "Nothing. Hope. Do what Will told us." "Ah!" Simon ducked his head, blinking. This sand, as if in retort, the wind dropped suddenly down to nothing, and the whirling sand fell to the beach to lie in utter stillness, with no sign at all of its malice blowing except the telltale little escarpment of sand sloping down from every exposed shell or pebble in the beach. In silence they tramped back toward the dunes. Nothing took shape in Barney's mind but the whirling sense of speed, and then a dimming, growing awareness of restraint, of his hands tied before him and a bandage over his eyes. Then rough hands were moving him, prodding him forward to stumble over stony ground. Once he fell and cried out as his knee hit a rock. Voices spoke impatiently in a strange guttural tongue, but after that a guiding hand was slipped beneath his arm. He heard military-sounding commands, and the walking grew smoother, doors opened and closed, and then he was stopped, and the covering pulled from his eyes, and Barney blinked, found himself being studied by a weather-beaten, dark-bearded face with bright dark eyes, wise eyes, deep-set, that reminded him of Merriman. The man was leaning against a heavy wooden table. He wore trousers and jerkin of leather over a thick woolen shirt. Still gazing at Barney, eyes flicking from his face to his clothes and back again, he said something curtly in the guttural speech. "I don't understand," Barney said. The man's face hardened a little. "English, then," he said, the voice to match the hair. "The voice to match the hair. Have they reached such a pass that they must use children now as spies?" Barney said nothing, since he felt he was spying indeed, peeping out of the corners of his eyes to discover where he might be. It was a low, dark room with wooden walls and floor and beamed roof. Through a window he glimpsed outer walls of gray stone. Men who seemed to be soldiers stood grouped around. They wore only a kind of leathern armor over rough clothes, but each had a knife at his belt, and some carried bows as tall as themselves. They were looking at him with hostility, some with open hatred. Barney shivered suddenly in fear at the sight of one man's hand playing restlessly with his knife. He looked up desperately at the dark-eyed man. I'm not a spy, truly. I don't even know where I am. I was kidnapped. Kidnapped? The man frowned, uncomprehending. Stolen, carried off. The dark eyes grew colder. Stolen to be brought to my stronghold, in the one part of Wales where no Englishman even of my allies dare set foot. The Marcher lords are foolish and do many stupid things in their rivalries, but none is quite as stupid as that. Try again, boy, if you wish to save your life. I can see no reason yet why I should not listen to my men, who are anxious to hang you by the neck in the next 5 minutes outside the door. Barney's throat was dry. He could scarcely swallow. He said again, whispering, I'm not a spy. And truthfully, Barney isn't. He just got pulled by one of the Riders of the Dark to heaven knows where. From the shadows behind the leader, the man with the knife said something roughly, contemptuously, but another laid a hand on his arm and stepped forward, speaking a few soft words. An old man with a wrinkly, heavy brown face and wisping white hair and beard. He was looking closely at Barney. Suddenly another soldier came hurrying into the room and spoke rapidly in the guttural tongue. The bearded leader let out an angry exclamation. He said a few brief words to the old man, nodding in Barney's direction, then swung preoccupied out of the room with men close around him. Only 2 soldiers remained guarding the door. And where were you stolen from, boy? The old man's voice was soft and lisping with a heavy accent. Barney said miserably, From a long way away. Bright eyes watched him skeptically through their wrinkles. I am Ilogach, bard to the prince, and I know him well, boy. He has had bad news, and it will not help his mood. When he comes back, I advise you to tell him the truth. The prince? Barney said. The old man looked at him coldly as if Barney were questioning the title. Owain Glyndwr, he said with chilling pride. Prince indeed. Owen ap Grefeld, Lord of Glyndurvi and Sycharth, Yscard and Gwynethnen, and now in this great rebelling, proclaimed Prince of Wales, and all Wales is with him against the English, and Henry Plantagenet cannot catch him, nor hold even his English castles here, or the Tangenit cannot catch him, nor hold any of his English castles here, or the towns they are pleased to call English burgs. All Wales is rising. A lilt came into his voice as if he were singing. And the farmers have sold their cattle to buy arms, and the mothers have sent their sons to the mountains to join Owain. The Welshmen who work in England have come home bringing English weapons with them, and the Welsh scholars at Oxford and Cambridge have left their books to join Owain. And we are winning! Wales has a leader again, and Englishmen will no longer own Welsh lands and despise and rule us from Westminster, for Owain ap Gruffydd will lead us to set ourselves free. Barney listened helplessly to the passion in the frail voice, his uneasiness growing. He felt very lonely and small. The door crashed open, and Glyndwr was there again among his men, scowling, silent. He glanced at Barney, to Ilogach. The old man shrugged. Listen to me, boy, said Glyndwr, his dark face grim. There is a comet in the sky these days to show my coming triumph, and on that side I shall ride. Nothing shall stop me. Nothing! Least of all the thought of tearing apart a spy from King Henry who refuses to tell his sending. His voice rose a little, quivering with control. I have just heard that a new English army is camped the other side of Welshpool. You have 1 minute remaining to tell me who sent you into Wales, and whether that army knows I am here. Only one thought sang through the fear loud in Barney's head now. He may belong to the dark. Don't talk. Don't tell him who you are, he said, choking. No. The man shrugged. Very well. I have sent to speak once more with the one who brought you to me. The light voice won from... To then. with the white horse. And after that, he broke off. Staring at the door as Barney turned his head, the whirling seemed to be back. The speed and the turning, and turning. Will and Brad, each holding the gleaming crystal sword, found themselves suddenly still now. A heavy wooden door before them burst open, and inside a low-roofed, dark room, they saw a group of armed men. One stood separate, a dark-bearded man with an air of authority, and before him was Barney, standing very small and tight-faced. Several of the men lunged forward in shouting confusion, and the bearded one snapped one sharp word, and they fell back instantly like startled dogs, swift but reluctant, looking at their leader with an astonishment that was almost suspicion. Will's senses as an old one was vibrating like a harp string. He stared at the man with the beard, and the man stared back for a moment, and then gradually the grim lines of his face were relaxing. Becoming a smile, an unspoken greeting in the old speech came into Will's mind, and aloud the man said in halting English, "You are come to a wild time, sign-seeker, but welcome, if my men do not take you for another English informer such as we have here." "Will," Barney said huskily, "he tells me I'm a spy and they want to kill me. Do you know him?" Will said slowly, "Greetings, Owain Glyndwr, the greatest Welshman of all." Bran was gazing in awe at the bearded man. "The only one ever to unite Wales against the English, through all the quarrelling and feuding." Glyndwr was looking at him with narrowed eyes. "But you... He glanced uncertainly at Will's blank, expressionless face and shook his head crossly. No nonsense. No place for dreams in my head with the last and hardest battle waiting on us. And the bloody English coming up like ants in spring." He turned to Will, waving a hand at Barney. "Is the boy with you, old one?" "Yes," Will said. "That explains much," Glyndwr said, "but not his stupidity in failing to tell me so." Barney said defensively, "How was I to know you were part of the dark?" The Welshman put back his head with a curt, incredulous laugh, but then straightened, looking with something like respect. "Well, true, not badly done, Sasbach. Take him now, sign-seeker." He reached out one strong arm and propelled Barney backwards as if he'd been a toy. "And go about your purposes in my land in peace, and I will give you any support you need." "There will be great need," Will said grimly, "if it is not already too late." He pointed to the sword that Bran was already holding out before him. In wonder and alarm, the blade was flickering again with blue light, as it had done at the destruction of the Lost Land, as it had done at the rushing descent of the dark that had carried Barney away. Glyndwr said abruptly, "The dark. But this is my stronghold. There can be none of the dark here." "There are many," said a soft voice at the door, "and by right, since you let the first of them in." "Dwah!" Glyndwr sprang upright, instinct pulling a dagger from his belt, for in the doorway between two armed men frozen helplessly out of movement stood the White Rider, a robed figure with eyes and teeth gleaming out of the shadows of the white hood. "You sent for me, Owain of Gwyniad, the rider said. "Sent for you?" "The light voice one from Tivin with the white horse," said the White Rider mockingly, "whom your men welcome so warmly for the gift of a spying English boy." The voice hardened, "and who claims in return now another boy of more significance, and with him the sword he carries." "You have no claim over me," Bran said with contempt. "The sword brings me into power, and out of your reach in this time or any other." Owain Glyndwr looked at Bran, at Will, and back at Bran, at the white hair and the pale face with his tawny eyes and the sword blade flickering with blue light. "The sword is two-edged," the White Rider said. Bran said, "The sword belongs to the light." "The sword belongs to no one. It is in the possession of the light only. Its power is the power of the old magic that made it." "Made it at the command of the light," Will said. "And yet also the tomb of every hope," said the rider softly, mask stilled by the white hood. "Do you not remember, old one? It was written, and there was no word as to whose hope should be entombed." "But they shall be your own," Owain Glyndwr said suddenly, and he snapped some words in Welsh to his men and sprang towards the back wall of the room, reaching for something. Soldiers flung themselves at the white-robed form of the rider. None managed to touch him. The rider lunged forward at Bran, but Bran swept the sword Eneas to and fro before him as if riding in the air, and the sword left a sheet of blue flame hanging, and the rider fell back with a shriek. Even as he moved, he seemed to change, to multiply, as if suddenly there were a crowd with him. But Owain was calling urgently, and Will dared not wait to see, but followed the rest through a doorway they had not seen before. The leather-clad Welsh soldiers were pushing them out onto the backs of a string of sturdy gray mountain ponies, and past slate cliffs and stone walls, and through green lanes they trotted swiftly and silently where Owain led. The roar and confusion of the dark rose behind them, and with it the clash of swords and the song of arrows from longbows, and voices shouting in English as well as Welsh. Will said nothing, but he knew that another battle as well as their own was beginning there. The reason for the Dark's choice of this time for their new hostage, and that Owain was not in the place where he must have been ached to be. Only when they reached a mountain path where the land rose very steeply and Owain motioned them to dismount and to follow them on foot, did Will look openly back and saw smoke rising from the grey roofs. They had left, and flame leaping, Owain said bitterly, "The Norman rides always on the back of the Dark as the Saxon did and the Dane." Barney said unhappily, "And I'm all those things mixed up, I suppose. Norman and Anglo-Saxon and Dane." "In what century?" Glyndwr said, pausing to stare up ahead at the mountain. "The 20th, Barney said. The Welshman stood and stopped very still for a moment. He looked at Will. Will nodded. "Esu Mawr," Glyndwr said. Then he smiled. "If the circle spreads that far forward, it is not so bad to find failure here for a time. Until the last summoning of the circle outside all time." He looked down at Barney. "No worry about your race, boy. Time changes the nature of them all in the end." Brad said above them, urgently, "The Dark is coming!" In his hand, Arias was burning a brighter blue. Owain looked down the mountain the way they had come, and his mouth tightened. Will turned too and gasped. A sheet of white flame was moving steadily towards them, up through the bracken, without sound or heat, remorseless in its pursuit of those it sought to destroy. A troop of Glyndwr's soldiers stood directly in its path. "It's not as bad as it seems," the Welsh leader said, watching Will's face. "Glyndwr has the tricks of an old one, be assured." The white teeth flashed in his dark face, and he clapped Will on his shoulder, pushing him. "Go," he said. "Go up that path, and you shall shortly be where you're meant to be. Leave me to take the Dark on a dance into these hills, and if my men and I seem to be kept in these hills forever, that will not be such a bad thing. For it will prove to my people that the Lord of the Dark was wrong, and that hope does not lie dead in a tomb, but is always alive for the hearts of men." He glanced at Brad and raised his dagger in a formal salute. Pob Hevel, my brother," he said gravely. Then he and his men were gone. Darting back down the mountain, Will led the way up the path on which he had been set. It wound between bleak peaks of grey rock, narrower and narrower, until they came to a sudden turn where the rock overhung the path, and each of them had to bend his head to pass beneath a low natural arch. And at the moment when all three of them were in line on that piece of the path which lay under the rock, there was a whirling and turning of the air about them, and a long, strange, husky shrieking in their ears. And when the giddiness went out of their minds, they were in a different place at a different time. And that is where we will end for today. As always, lovelies, I do appreciate you taking the time to enjoy Storytime with Chris, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.